He once controlled the narrative. Now the world is listening to his downfall. The room was charged with a tension that felt almost tangible. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras capturing every flicker of emotion. The air hummed with the weight of anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the city pulsed with the rhythm of a society on the edge of revelation, its people whispering of a scandal that had upended the powerful and brought the impossible into focus. At the center of it all stood Carolene Voss. Carolene had spent a decade in the shadows, gathering fragments of a truth others had tried to bury. A former investigative journalist turned whistleblower, she had once been a nameless voice in the background of a system that discarded its own. But this case was different. This case was personal. Carolene stood firm, her chin held high. Today wasn't just about justice, it was about truth. The trial of Richard Wolff, former Chancellor of the Free Republic and a man whose name had once been synonymous with stability, had become the most scrutinized event in the nation's history. The charges were staggering: embezzlement, obstruction of justice, and the deliberate silencing of whistleblowers. But for Carolene, the real crime was the manipulation of power, a power that had threatened her very life. It started with one whispered accusation, an abuse of power that escalated into a national scandal. It began in the dead of night, when Carolene answered a call from a source she had never met but had trusted implicitly. The voice on the other end was trembling, strained by fear. "They're watching me," the man said. "They're going to make me disappear if I speak." His name was Eli Bernstein, a mid-level analyst in the Ministry of Economic Affairs. He had uncovered something in the archives, an irregularity in the funding of a government project that had funneled millions into private hands. When he tried to report it, he was framed for embezzlement and forced into exile. Carolene had buried the story at the time, fearing the same fate. But when Eli vanished and his family was targeted with threats, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She dug deeper, following a trail of encrypted messages and coded financial transfers. What she found was a web of corruption so vast it threatened to unravel the very foundation of the state. Across the aisle, Richard Wolff remained motionless, his cold gaze fixed forward. The man who had once stood before the nation as a beacon of integrity now sat in the defendant's chair, his silk suit stiff with the weight of disgrace. His legal team had painted him as a victim, a man caught in a political maelstrom. But Carolene knew better. She had seen the way his eyes had narrowed during closed-door meetings, the way his hand had whispered instructions to subordinates who had vanished without a trace. The first blow came in the form of a leaked video. A grainy recording from a classified meeting captured by an anonymous whistleblower. Wolff's voice, calm but unflinching, laid bare the truth. "The people don't need to know. If they do, they'll rise. And when they rise, we'll fall." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. The judge's gavel cracked like a thunderclap. Carolene rose, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling within her. "This isn't just about money," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "It's about control. The kind of control that silences dissent, that turns justice into a weapon, and that demands the sacrifice of lives to protect its own." The first witness, a former aide named Clara Mendez, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she recounted the day Wolff had ordered the termination of Eli Bernstein's investigation. He said, "If the truth gets out, it won't just be my career that's destroyed. It'll be the whole system. He didn't just threaten Eli, he threatened me too. I was told to forget what I'd seen or face the same fate." The second witness, a financial auditor named Marcus Ray, laid bare the scale of the corruption. "The accounts were manipulated," he said, his voice like steel. "Millions were siphoned into offshore accounts under the guise of strategic investments, but the real purpose was to fund a covert operation designed to discredit anyone who questioned Wolff's policies." He slid a folder across the table. "These are the records, every transaction, every transfer, everything they tried to hide." Wolff's lawyer, Charles Langley, rose sharply. "This is circumstantial," he declared. "The prosecution is trying to paint my client as a villain, but let's not forget, it's the people who elected him who allowed this system to exist. We're all complicit." Carolene's eyes blazed. "Complicity isn't an excuse," she shot back. "You don't get to stand here and claim innocence when your own lips have shaped the lies that destroyed lives. You claim to serve the people. But who really did you serve when you silenced those who spoke the truth?" The courtroom erupted into murmurs. As the trial wore on, the truth became undeniable. The cracked gavel, a symbol of justice once wielded to suppress, now echoed with the weight of accountability. Carolene's voice, once a whisper in the dark, had become a chorus. The people who had watched from the sidelines were no longer passive. They demanded answers. But the trial was only the first step. As the final arguments were made, Carolene stepped to the edge of the courtroom, her gaze fixed on the man who had once controlled the narrative. Wolff's face was impassive, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes: anger, fear, perhaps even regret. The judge's words rang out. The court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. The world watched as a man who had shaped the destiny of a nation faced the consequences of his actions. But Caroline knew the battle wasn't over. The trial wasn't the end, it was only the beginning of a reckoning. And as she stepped into the light, the weight of the truth still clung to her like a shadow.